Rain came sideways off the moor and rattled the shutters of the Duskmoor Roadhouse. And Emmerich Caldmere sat in the darkest corner of the common room and told himself he had stopped only for the storm. It was a lie. His wolf knew it before he did. The beast had been pacing since the moment they crossed the threshold. Not with hunger, not with the old itch for a fight, something deeper than either, something the king had no name for. It pressed hard against his ribs and stared across the room, toward a young woman moving between the tables, with a tray balanced on one hand. Nothing about her should have held a king's attention. A plain, gray dress, worn soft at the elbows, hair, the color of wet ash, tied back with a strip of leather. She kept her eyes down and her steps quiet, the way servants learn to when a room fills with powerful men. She was no one. A waitress at a crossroads inn on the ragged edge of his lands. Yet his wolf would not look away from her. Emmerich frowned into his cup. He had ridden through half the province settling border quarrels, and he was tired. And tired men imagined things. That was all. He forced his gaze back to the fire. His men were not tired. They were bored, and bored warriors are a kind of weather all their own. Farek sat at the center of them, loud and gleaming, his boots propped on a chair that was not his. As Beta of the Caldmere, second only to the king, Varek had never once in his life been told to put his feet down. He was handsome, the way a drawn blade is handsome, all edges and cold light, and he wore his cruelty like a well-cut coat. The waitress reached his table. "More wine," Varek said, without looking at her. She filled his cup. The pour was clean and steady, not a drop wasted. She turned to go. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist. Emmerich felt his wolf go very still. "Did I say you could leave?" Varek said. He smiled around the room, inviting his men to enjoy the sport. They did. "Look at this one. Skin and bone, and a face like a shut door. Tell me, girl, do you ever smile? Or did somebody beat that out of you a long time ago?" The waitress said nothing. She did not pull against his grip. She did not flinch. She simply waited, still as deep water, until he tired of holding her and let go. That should have ended it. But her stillness had pricked at Varek the way a locked room pricks at a man used to every door swinging open for him. He stood. He was a full head taller than she was, and he made certain the whole room saw it. "You spilled a drop," he said. She had not. "On my boot. A drop of wine on the beta's own boot. That is an insult to your king's second, and an insult to the king himself." He spread his arms wide. His men howled with laughter. "So here is what we will do. You may strike me. One free blow. Go on." He tapped his own jaw with 2 fingers, grinning like a wolf at a wounded thing. "One punch, I dare you. Put everything you have behind it, little mouse, and if it so much as moves me, I will kneel down and beg your pardon in front of all these good men." And Emmerich, watching from his corner, felt every hair on his body lift. Because her face had not changed. There was no fear in it, no fury, no tears. There was only a terrible practiced calm, the calm of someone who had been offered a free strike once before, and had learned exactly what it cost to take one. She looked at Varek's jaw, the way a woman looks at a chore. For the length of one held breath, Emmerich was certain she meant to do it. Then a child screamed from the kitchen doorway, and everything the night had been, until that moment, quietly came apart. The boy could not have been more than 6 years old. He came out of the kitchen at a dead run, a small thing with hair like his mother's and eyes far too large for his thin face. And he did not slow, and he did not seem to care that the room was full of grown wolves who could break him without trying. He threw both arms around the waitress and pressed his face into her apron as though he could burrow clean out of the world. "He is here," the boy whispered. "Mama, the man from the road." He came back. "He is here." Something crossed the waitress's face then. Not fear. Fear was far too small a word for it. It was the look of a woman who had spent years listening for one particular footstep in the dark, and had at last heard it fall. Her hand rose and cradled the back of the child's head. Her eyes swept the room once, fast, marking the doors, marking the blades, marking every hard man in it the way a soldier counts a field before a battle. Emmerich saw her do it. He did not understand it. He could not stop watching it. Varric, of course, saw only another chance. "Ah," he said, delighted. "A pup, so the little mouse has a little mouse of her own. Come here, whelp, let me have a proper look at you." The waitress moved the child behind her. It was a small thing, a half step, a turn of one shoulder, nothing a bard would ever trouble to sing. But every wolf in that room felt what rode in on it. Power. It rolled off her for less than a heartbeat, cold and vast and old. A presence that had no business living inside a servant or a rogue or any ordinary wolf. It flooded the common room, the way black water floods a sinking hull. Cups stopped, halfway, to open mouths. Varric's men, hard men, killers to the last of them, felt their own wolves cringe and whine and press their bellies flat to the floorboards, without knowing why. Varric himself lost his color and rocked back on his heels. Then, folded away as swiftly as it had come, tucked back behind the plain gray dress and the quiet ashen face, until the woman standing before them was only a waitress again, only a mother with a frightened boy clutched against her skirts. The whole room let out its breath at once. Emmerich did not. He had felt alpha power his entire life. He carried it in his own blood. He had knelt before his father and stood over fallen enemies, and he knew the true weight of it the way a smith knows the weight of iron in the dark. What had just moved through that room was not the parlor trick of some hedge witch. It was not the last dying flare of a spent bloodline. It was the real thing, buried and disciplined, leashed with a control that unsettled him more than the raw force of it ever could. Waitresses did not carry that inside them. No one carried that and poured wine for a beta at a crossroads inn. Emmerich turned his head slowly and found he was not the only man in the room who understood. At the edge of the royal retinue, an old warrior had risen from his bench. Halvard had served 3 kings and buried 2 of them. He had a face like a headland. The sea had long ago given up on wearing down, and in all their years together Emmerich had never once seen it change. It was changing now. The old wolf stared at the waitress, as though the dead had walked in out of the rain, and his weathered mouth moved, and though no sound reached the king, Emmerich had spent enough years reading men across the noise of battlefields to know the shape a name makes on a pair of lips. It was not a curse, it was not a prayer, it was a name. And the waitress, who had shown nothing to Varric and nothing to the king, went white to the lips the instant she saw the old man's face. For a moment, the whole room hung on the edge of something. Then the roadhouse door banged wide on its hinges, and the moment shattered like a dropped glass. Emmerich. The woman who swept in out of the storm did not so much enter the room as claim it. She was beautiful the way a hard frost is beautiful, all clean lines and clear, cold sky, and not 1 degree of warmth anywhere in her. Rain jeweled the pale fur at her collar. Her gaze found the king in his dark corner before the door had finished swinging shut behind her, and her mouth curved into the smile she kept only for him, the one that had never once managed to reach her eyes. Corisand of the Windholt. The king's betrothed, his intended Luna. The alliance his council had prayed for. The match his advisors had blessed. The wedding now but 1 turn of the moon away. She crossed the floor toward him, and Emmerich watched her, the way he had watched everything, since walking through that door, which was to say, far too closely. He saw the exact instant she noticed the waitress. Corisand stopped. It lasted less than a breath, a stutter in a graceful walk, a hitch that no one else in the room would ever have marked. But her lovely frost of a face lost its color in a single rush, and for one unguarded moment, something moved behind her eyes that Emmerich had never seen there in all the months of their courtship. Not jealousy. He would have understood jealousy. A betrothed queen who finds her king in a dim room with a young woman has every right to it, and Coruscant was proud enough to feel such a thing keenly. This was not that. This was fear. Then it was gone, smoothed away, buried beneath the practiced smile, and she finished her walk to his table, as though nothing at all in the world were wrong. "You left the column," she said lightly. "In this weather, of all nights." "I was worried for you." "The storm," Emmerich said. "We sheltered." Nothing more. Of course. And her eyes did not travel to the waitress again. That was the thing that snagged him. A woman truly startled by arrival looks again and again, unable to help herself. Coruscant looked everywhere in that room, except at the gray-eyed woman by the kitchen, and the effort of not looking was costing her something. He could see it plainly, a tightness at the hinge of her jaw, a stillness held too carefully to be calm. Across the room, Varric had found his feet again, and most of his color with them. He came toward the king, and Emmerich noted that the swagger had drained out of his walk. Whatever had crawled up the beta's spine when that power washed over the room had not entirely crawled back down. "My king," Varric said, "we should ride. The pass floods when the rain comes down like this. If we linger here until morning." "You were in no hurry to leave a moment ago," Emmerich said. Varric's eyes flicked, only once, to the waitress. And Emmerich, whose wolf had been howling low in his chest since the moment he crossed the threshold, watched the two of them look at one another. It was the briefest thing. A glance thrown and caught and dropped again, in the space of a breath, the kind of look that passes between two people who share a buried secret and have just understood that the secret is standing not 10 feet away in a plain gray dress. Coruscant's chin dipped a fraction. Varric's jaw set hard, a question asked and answered without a single word between them. And Emmerich was never meant to catch any part of it. He caught all of it. Something cold and certain settled into the pit of the king's stomach. He had come to this roadhouse a tired man sheltering from rain. He was not tired anymore. "Hallvard," the king said without turning his head, "come here to me." The old warrior did not move. He stood rooted where he was, still staring at the waitress, and when at last he spoke, his voice came out, cracked and low, meant for no one in the room, or perhaps meant only for the dead. "You have her face," Hallvard said to the woman. "Moon above us all, you have your mother's very face." The roadhouse fell into a silence, so complete that the storm outside seemed to lean closer to listen. The waitress set down her tray. She did it slowly and with great care, the way a person sets down a thing when she suspects she may need both hands free in another moment. She bent and murmured a single word against the boy's hair, and the child bolted for the kitchen, and she straightened and turned to face a room packed with the most dangerous wolves in the province, her back straight, her chin level, her long-kept secret bleeding out at last into the open air. "I do not know what you mean," she said, but her voice shook on the words, and Coruscant had gone rigid as carved stone, and Varric's hand had drifted, slow and quiet, to the hilt at his belt. And in his dark corner, the king rose up out of his chair at last, because whatever was breaking open in this room, whatever these three people knew and he did not, he intended to be standing on his feet when it finally tore loose. "Everyone out!" Emmerich did not raise his voice. He never needed to. The words moved through the common room like the drop in pressure that comes before a storm, and the roadhouse emptied itself in the space of a dozen heartbeats. Drovers and traders and off-duty guards left their cups standing where they were. The innkeeper vanished behind his own bar, as though the floor had opened and taken him. Varric did not move. "Out," Emmerich said again, softer, which was worse. "My king, the pass, we truly must ride. We stay." The king's eyes had not once left the waitress. "Take the men to the stables and see to the horses. When I want your counsel, I will send for it." For one long moment, the beta looked as though he might argue. Then something in the set of the king's shoulders decided the matter for him, and he took his grinning men out into the rain with him. He did not grin as he passed her, he looked at her instead. One last unreadable look, and then the door swung shut and the room held only 3 people and the fire, Corisande, lingered by the hearth. "You as well," Emmerich said. She stared at him. "Emmerich, whatever that old fool believes he saw, this creature is a servant. A stray, with a fatherless child. You cannot mean to sit and take her story like a magistrate. Leave us, Corisande." He had never spoken to her in that voice before. He watched the words. Land. He watched her decide, in the cold, quick way she decided all things, that this was not the ground on which to fight him. Not tonight. She gathered her wet furs and swept out into the dark, and the scent of her went with her, and then the king was alone with the waitress and the small sounds of the rain. She had not moved from where she stood. "I mean you no harm," he said. She laughed. It was a dreadful sound, low and cracked, with nothing of humor anywhere in it. It was the laugh of a woman who had heard those exact words once before, at the worst hour of her life, from a mouth that had then gone on to do the very opposite. "There is no right thing you could say to me," she said. "Not you. Not with that face." He took a slow step toward her. She did not retreat, but every line of her body drew taut, the way a wire draws taut in the moment, before it sings or snaps. "The old man named you by your mother," Emmerich said. "Who was she?" "Nobody. She was nobody at all. In the end, that is what your kind always makes of us." "My kind kings," she said, and the word came out of her like something torn from a wound. "Caldmere." The name of his own bloodline in her mouth sounded like a charge read aloud before a hanging. Emmerich studied her. The gray eyes, the ashen hair, the impossible discipline of that leashed and buried power. And somewhere deep in the cellar of his memory, in a room he had bricked over long ago and taught himself never to enter, something stirred and turned in its sleep. "What is your name?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Sorrel." "Sorrel of where?" "Of nowhere." She held his gaze, and did not blink. "Of a place that is not written on your maps any longer. You saw to that yourself." The cold in the king's stomach began to spread. "Tell me plainly," he said. And something in her slipped its leash, not the power this time. The other thing. The thing she had held down far longer and far harder. "The Sylvain," she said. "We were called the Sylvain. We kept the high valley beyond the northern pass for 11 generations of the moon. We bent the knee to your father, and we paid our tithe in silver and in grain, and we sent our sons to bleed in your wars, and we were loyal to the last, and none of it counted for anything in the end." She came toward him now, and it was the king who discovered he did not wish to move. One winter, the word came down from the crown that the Sylvain had turned traitor, that we harbored rogues, that we had to be put to the sword for the safety of the pack. Your riders came up through the pass with fire in their hands, and they stopped to ask not one single question, and when they were finished there was no more Sylvain, no more valley, no more mother, only ash, and a name your mapmakers were ordered to forget. The fire cracked, the rain fell. The king found he could not speak. "I was but 17, Sorrel said. "And I have spent every year since then remembering the face of the man who rode at the head of those riders." She looked at him, and the hatred in her eyes was a clean and finished and quiet thing. "Aged the way iron ages in cold water. You have grown since, your majesty, but I would know your face in the dark, in a crowd, in my grave, I would know it anywhere." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Emmerich's boots, because he did remember the northern campaign. He remembered the pass choked with snow. He remembered being told, gravely and often, that the valley folk were traitors sheltering rogue killers who would come down and butcher Caldmere children in their beds. He remembered the orders. He remembered the smoke rising black against the white peaks, and the sick pride of a young king who believed he had done a hard and necessary thing. And the man who had first brought him that word, who had sworn to the treachery of the Sylvain upon his own honor, who had ridden at the king's right hand through the burning valley and told him afterward that he had done his kingly duty and could sleep easy. That man had walked out to the stables, not an hour ago, whistling into the storm, to see to the horses. The storm did not break. It settled over the moor for the night, the way a beast settles to watch a fire, patient and unhurried, and the pass flooded exactly as Varric had promised. And so the king of the Caldmere found himself the unwilling guest of a roadhouse. He did not sleep. He sat in the narrow upper room the innkeeper had swept out for him, and he listened to the rain hammer the roof, and he turned the woman's words over and over in his hands until their edges cut him. The Sylvain. The High Valley. 11 generations of loyalty answered with fire. He had ridden through that smoke himself. He had believed every word he had been given, and every word had come from the same trusted mouth. Somewhere past the deep middle of the night, he heard a small sound out in the passage. He opened his door. A boy sat on the top step of the stair, knees drawn up to his chin, a stub of candle guttering on the board beside him. The waitress's child. He flinched when the light fell on him, then went still, the way small creatures go. Still when running is no longer an option. You should be asleep, Emeric said. I have bad dreams, the boy said simply, about the fire. He said it the way another child might mention the rain, as a plain fact of a life, and something in the king's chest folded over on itself. Emeric lowered himself onto the step. He was careful to leave a good arm's length between them, and careful to make himself smaller, a thing a man his size had to work at. For a while neither of them spoke. The candle leaned and straightened in the draught, and the rain went on and on against the shutters. Is Sorrel your mother? The king asked at last. The boy considered this with great seriousness. She is now, he said. She was not always. He picked at a splinter on the step. She found me in the ash after the burning. I was very small. She says I cried for 2 whole days, and she carried me the entire way down the mountain, and never once set me down, not even when her arms shook so hard she wept. He looked up. So she is my mama. She chose me. That is better than the other way around, she says. Anyone can be born to somebody. Not everybody gets chosen. Emeric held very still. And how many others? He asked softly. How many did she carry down off that mountain? Bram counted on his fingers, lips moving, and then he gave up and shrugged. Lots, he said, not all at once over the years. They come to her when they have nowhere left in the world to go. She finds them, a place, or a new name, or a way across the water to the far packs. She sits up with them when they wake screaming. She says a Luna does not stop being a Luna simply because her valley has burned. She says the pack is the people, never the ground. The ground is only dirt. The people are the pack. The king felt the words go into him like a slow blade turned by a patient hand. The boy nodded, as though this were the most ordinary thing in all the world. She keeps the seal safe for when the valley needs one again. He said it before he could think better of it. And then his eyes went round and huge, and his small hand flew up to cover his own mouth, and the fear that swept across his face was the very same fear Emeric had watched sweep across the mother's, down in the common room, hours before. What seal? Emeric said, very gently. Bram shook his head hard. Again and again. It is all right, the king said. You have done nothing wrong, I promise you that. But the boy had gone white and small, and he whispered at last, from behind his fingers. She said never to tell a living soul. She said the man from the road would kill us both for it. The man came twice before, asking his questions in the villages, asking after a gray-eyed woman who carried a Sylvain seal. Both times we had to run in the black of night and leave everything we owned behind, and start all over again, somewhere new with names that were not ours. She said the next time he found us would be the last time. She said there would be no running after that. Emeric went cold the whole way through. The man from the road, he said, describe him to me. Leave nothing out. Tall, Bram whispered. A wolf who smiles all the time, even when nothing is funny. Fine clothes, finer than a lord's. A voice like he is always just about to laugh at you. And he wears the king's own mark, stitched on his shoulder. So Mama says no one will ever believe a word we say, because who in the wide world would take the word of a serving girl over the word of the king's own beta? The candle flame stood straight up, then bowed low. And there, in the doorway at the foot of the stair, stood Sorrel. She had come up the passage on bare feet without a whisper of sound, the way she seemed to do everything, and she had heard enough. Emmerich saw it plainly in her face. Not anger, this time. Something far worse than anger. It was the look of a woman watching the last standing wall of a house she had given years of her life to building come quietly down, stone by patient stone, in front of the one man alive she could least afford to trust. Bram, she said, and her voice did not shake at all now. Go to bed. Now. The boy fled past her into the dark, and Sorrel lifted her gray eyes to the king, seated on the stair, and said in a low and even and terrible voice, "So now you know what your good and faithful beta has been hunting from village to village these 6 long years. Ask yourself the question you are so plainly afraid to ask, Your Majesty. Ask yourself why a loyal man hunts down the survivors of a massacre that the crown swore to you was only ever a matter of justice." Out in the stable loft, above the steaming backs of the horses, 2 people stood close together in the dark and did not touch. "She has the seal," Coruscant said. "She must." That old fool Halvard as good as named her in front of the entire room. If the king asks the right question just once more, we are finished, both of us. Everything we built, gone in a single night. Varric leaned against a post and worked very hard at looking unbothered, which was precisely how she knew he was afraid. He had been afraid since the common room. Since the cold, vast thing that had risen off the waitress and pressed his own wolf belly down to the floorboards in front of his own men, he had not felt small in a great many years. He discovered, standing there in the horse smell and the dark, that he did not care for the feeling in the least. "She is one woman," he said, with a half-starved child hanging off her skirts. "She is the last true-blooded Luna of a line the crown swore to the whole pack had gone extinct," Coruscant hissed. "She is living, breathing proof that the Sylvain were never traitors at all, that the intelligence against them was forged from nothing, that you forged it, Varric, with your own hand, and that I stood at the high table and swore before the council it was true. And that Lady Mordaunt gave the order to burn 11 generations of loyal wolves in their homes, so the crown could swallow their silver mines and their high valley whole, and call it justice." She stepped in close, her breath a thread of white in the cold. "If that seal ever reaches the king's open hand, we do not merely lose our places at court, we lose our heads on the block, and Mordaunt will let us lose them. She will feed the 2 of us to the pack, and weep very prettily at the trial, and walk away with her regency spotless." The name settled between them, like frost forming on glass. Varric was quiet for a long moment. The rain drummed steadily on the roof of the loft, and a horse shifted and blew below them. Then, "The king cannot be given the chance to ask," he said. Coruscant looked at him. "Rogues," Varric said slowly, warming to the word, the fear in him curdling into something colder and far more useful. "The roads are cruel in a storm like this one, a lonely roadhouse at a flooded crossing. A serving woman and her whelp, found still and cold in the gray of the morning. Such a pity, such a sadly common tragedy of these lawless times." He very nearly smiled. And who in the pack could ever think to blame the king's own grieving beta, who tried so desperately hard to reach them in time and arrived just moments too late to save them? "You brought only 10 men north," she said. "I need 3, said Varric. He pushed himself off the post. "And I need it finished long before the past rains. And the king can carry that woman anywhere near a court, or a witness, or a single quiet hour in which she might tell him everything her boy has so plainly already begun to spill." He crossed to the ladder. Coruscant caught his sleeve at the last. "If you fail in this," she said, "do not come back to me. I will not know your face. I will not know your name." Varric looked down at her hand upon his sleeve, until, slowly, she took it away. Then he climbed down into the warm and living dark of the stable below, and he woke 3 of his men with a hand on the shoulder and a finger laid to his lips, and he told them in a low and pleasant voice what wolves were owed to do to rogues who would dare to raise a blade against their king. They rose without a single word between them, and they reached for the long knives at their belts. "She is only a serving girl," one of the 3 men murmured, half asleep still, buckling his belt. "Since when do we ride out in the black of night for a serving girl?" Varric crouched beside him in the straw and spoke very quietly, so the others had to lean in to catch it. "She is not a serving girl," he said. "She is a lie that has learned how to walk and talk and raise a child. And in the morning she will be what she should have been 6 years ago, a closed grave and a story no one repeats." The man asked nothing further. There was something in the beata's smile that made further questions feel unwise. And across the flooded yard, through the streaming loft window, a single candle still burned in an upper room of the roadhouse. Small, steady, wholly unaware of the 3 shapes that had just risen in the dark and begun, without any hurry at all, to come for it. Sorrel did not sleep in a bed. She had not slept in a proper bed in 6 years. She sat on the floor with her back to the wall, and Bram breathing soft and slow in the cot beside her, and she listened to the house, the way she had trained herself to listen to every house they had ever passed through, waiting for the one sound that did not belong. When it came, it was very small, the 3rd stair from the bottom, the one that groaned beneath any weight heavier than a cat. It groaned once, and then went carefully, deliberately silent. She was on her feet before the sound had finished dying. She had rehearsed this exact moment 1,000 times in the dark of 1,000 rented rooms, because a woman who keeps a vanished pack alive learns to live one breath ahead of the knife, or she does not live at all. There was no fear in her now. Fear was a luxury for people who still believed the worst thing had not yet happened to them. She had used up all her fear 6 years ago in a burning doorway, and what was left in its place was colder and far more useful. She woke Bram with a hand over his mouth and her lips at his ear. "Under the floor," she breathed. "The way we practiced. Do not come out for anything. Not for anything, my love." The boy did not cry. He had learned long ago not to cry at moments like this one. He slid from the cot and lifted the loose board she had worked free their first night, and folded himself down into the dark beneath the room, and she laid the board back over him just as the door came off its hinges. 3 men, long knives, the king's own mark stitched bright on every shoulder. The first died before he understood he was in a fight. Sorrel had spent 6 years telling the world she was a serving girl, and the world had believed her because she had made very certain it would. She moved now the way her mother had taught her before the burning, the way the old Sylvain war mistresses had taught the Luna line for 11 generations, and it was a thing of dreadful economy. Nothing wasted, nothing wild. She turned the first man's own blade and put it where it needed to go, and had it out again, and buried in the second before the body of the first had finished falling. The third was faster. He got a hand in her hair and a knife to the soft of her throat, and he laughed low because he thought it was over. She felt the 3rd man's grip in her hair and did not panic, because panic was another luxury she had spent long ago, and even with the blade at her throat, some patient part of her was already counting the half-second it would take him to draw it across. Then, the wall of the room simply came apart. Emeric had woken in his narrow room, with his heart slamming and his wolf screaming. A single word he did not know how to hear, and he had not stopped to reason or to dress or to wonder. He had followed the scream in his own blood through 2 walls, and he came through the 3rd, as a king rarely lets himself be seen, half-changed, huge, the beast riding just under the skin. He tore the 3rd man off her and broke him against the floor, and stood over the wreck of him, chest heaving, eyes burning gold in the dark, and then he caught it. Her scent. Her true scent, unmasked at last. The bitter green herb smell. She wore to hide it, torn away in the struggle. And beneath it, the thing that had been driving his wolf half mad since the moment he crossed the roadhouse threshold at dusk. His whole body went rigid, the half-change shuddered and held. Because his wolf, which had knelt to no one, which had chosen no one in 30 years of being asked to choose, threw back its head inside him and howled one word into the marrow of him, over and over, until he could not hear anything else. Mate, mate, mate. Sorrel stood among the bodies, with a dead man's knife still in her hand and her chest heaving and blood that was not hers running down her arm, and she watched the king of the Caldmere understand, and she saw the exact moment the word reached his eyes. "No," she said quietly. It came out of her like a plea and a curse braided together. "No, not you. It was never going to be you." Below the floorboards, in the dark, a small voice whispered, "Mama." And out in the flooded yard a horn sounded, high and thin through the rain, as the fourth man Varric had posted at the stable door, turned and ran to wake the rest. Because the thing they had come quietly to bury had refused, once again, to stay in its grave. They did not sleep again, that night. There was no more sleep left in it. Emeric had the surviving man of Varric's 3 dragged into the common room and bound to a chair, and he had Hallvard rouse the handful of the royal guard. The king still trusted with a task like this one. Older men, quiet men, men who had served his father. The fourth man, the one who had bolted from the stable door to raise the alarm, 2 of Hallvard's older wolves, ran down in the flooded yard before he reached the tree line, and so no alarm was ever raised. The rest of the retinue Emeric left sleeping, for he did not yet know how deep the rot in his own house ran. And until he did, he would trust it with nothing. Bram would not come out from under the floor for anyone but her. When at last she lifted the board and drew him up into her arms, he clung to her neck and would not look at the room, and she carried him to the fire, and sat with him in her lap, and pressed her cheek to his hair and did not once let go, even to bind her own wounded arm. Emeric watched them, and felt the word his wolf had spoken settle deeper into him with every breath, until it was not a shout anymore, but a certainty. Quiet and total, like a name he had always known and only just been permitted to remember. She felt him watching. She lifted her head. "Say it," she said. "You are burning to say it. So say it and be done." "You are my mate," Emeric said. The words fell into the room and lay there. "I know what you are to me," Sorrel said. Her voice was very steady, and that steadiness was the most frightening thing about it. "I have known since the moment your wolf came through that wall, because mine has been trying to crawl out of my chest toward yours since dusk, and I have spent every hour since fighting it down like a sickness." She looked at him without a scrap of softness. "Do you imagine that is a gift, Your Majesty? Do you imagine I thank the moon for it? The fate that saw fit to bind me, body and wolf and soul, to the very man who rode at the head of the riders who took my mother from me." Emeric had no answer. There was none to have. "Reach into my collar," she said. "Go on. You have already taken everything else the Sylvain ever had. Take a look at the last of it." He crossed to her slowly, and with the care a man uses near a wounded thing that can still kill him, he drew out what hung against her heart on its worn cord. A disc of old silver, no wider than a thumbnail, stamped with a white hind standing beneath a thin crescent moon. It was warm from her skin. It was worn nearly smooth, by 6 years of a frightened woman's thumb. It was the seal of the Luna of the Sylvain, and there was only ever one alive at a time, and it passed from mother to daughter, and the daughter who held it was the pack made flesh. "My mother pressed it into my hand through the smoke," Sorrel said, and now her voice did shake, "just once, and then she mastered it. She was already burning. She could have run. Instead she stood in the door of the great hall with a spear, and bought her people minutes with her life. And she put this in my palm, and closed my fingers over it, and told me to run, and to live, and to keep the pack, because the pack is the people, not the ground. I was but 17. I watched it all from the tree line above the valley, with that seal still warm in my fist, and I made myself look at every part of it, every roof that caught, every wolf that ran, and every wolf that did not run fast enough, because someone had to remember it truly, and I was the only soul left who could. That was the night the girl in me died and the keeper took her place. I have kept them ever since, every soul your riders did not manage to kill. I have kept them fed and hidden and alive, and I have kept this, and I have waited. Not for rescue. I stopped waiting for rescue a long time ago. I waited for the day. The truth might be worth something to somebody with the power to use it. And Emeric, kneeling before the fire, with the whole weight of the Sylvain resting warm in his palm, finally understood the full and terrible shape of the thing that had been done. It had never been about traitors. There had never been any rogues in the High Valley. There had been silver in the hills, and grain in the fields, and 11 generations of loyal wolves who paid their tithe on time, and there had been a regent who wanted it all, and a beta willing to forge the words to justify the taking, and a proud noblewoman willing to swear to the lie at the high table. And there had been one thing more, the thing that made the hurry, the thing that turned a slow theft into a night of fire. A Sylvain Luna, come of age, whose bloodline the old prophecies had long tied to the Caldmere throne. A woman fate itself would set beside the king one day, whether the court willed it or not. A mate, his mate, Mordaunt, had not merely burned a valley for its silver. She had burned it to murder a bond before it could ever draw breath, because a true-blooded Luna at the king's side, loved and trusted and listening, was the one thing in the wide world that a false regent could never survive. They had not only stolen the Sylvain from the world, Emeric thought. They had reached into his own chest, years before he ever knew her face, and torn out the one thing that was always going to be his. And they had done it while he thanked them for their wise and loyal counsel. He looked up at her. At the woman his court had spent a fortune in blood to keep him from ever meeting. They will answer for all of it, he said. Every soul, every year, I swear it to you on the seal in my hand and on the moon that made us both. Do not swear to me, Sorrel said, and the exhaustion in her was suddenly vast and ancient. Kings have sworn to my people before. She reached out and closed his fingers over the seal, the way her mother had once closed hers. Do not swear. Word of the killing at the roadhouse could not be kept quiet, and Emeric did not try. He wanted it loud. He wanted the whole column to see him ride back into the king's holdfast at dawn, with 3 of his own Beta's men dead behind him on a cart, and the last of them living and bound, with a gray-eyed woman and a small boy at his side under his own banner, and with a face on him that made brave men find somewhere else to look. The court had come out onto the steps and the gallery to watch the king return, and they had expected a tired sovereign home from a wet errand. They found instead a king with winter in his face and a dead man's cart at his back, and the holdfast went quiet around him, the way a wood goes quiet when a great predator walks into it. Varric met them in the great courtyard, because a guilty man who runs has already confessed, and Varric was not yet ready to confess. He came down the steps with his arms wide and his voice full of grief. "My king," he cried, "thank the moon you are safe. When I found your room empty, and heard there had been rogues on the road, I feared the very worst." He let his gaze find Sorrel and arranged his face into cold suspicion. "And I see the source of the trouble has followed you home, your majesty. This woman is not what she..." Emeric hit him. It was not a king's blow, measured and dignified. It was the blow of a man who had learned in a single night exactly how thoroughly he had been used, and it took the beta off his feet and laid him full length on the wet stones in front of half the court. Varric came up on one elbow, with blood on his fine mouth, and the grief wiped clean off his face, and for the first time the thing underneath it showed through. The cold, calculating thing, and the watching court saw it, and a murmur went through them like wind through wheat. "Bind him," Emmerich said. The guard hesitated only a heartbeat, then obeyed, because the king's father had chosen these ones well. The confession, when it came in a cold, high room with the door shut, and the seal on the table between them, and the surviving assassin already talking freely in the hope of keeping his head. Varric held out, longer than Coruscant dead. She broke, the moment she understood that the boy had already told the king half of it and the killer the other half, and that there was no version of the coming days in which she was not ruined, only versions in which she was ruined and alive, or ruined and dead. She chose alive. She told it all, quickly, to be first, the way she did everything. The forged intelligence, the night of the burning, the years of hunting, the survivors so the lie could never be disproved, the name at the top of all of it. She named the villages where the hunters had gone door to door. She named the healers who had been paid to call old wounds new ones. She named the clerks who had burned the true tithe records, so that no ledger would ever show 11 generations of honest silver flowing down out of a valley of supposed traitors. Each name she gave was a stone off her own back and onto the backs of the others, and she gave them quickly and precisely, and Emmerich let her, and wrote nothing down, because he would forget none of it. And then the door opened, without a knock, and the name, at the top of all of it, walked in on her own 2 feet. Lady Mordaunt, Lord Regent of the Interior, the woman who had raised the king from a motherless boy of 8 into a king, did not look afraid. She looked, if anything, disappointed. The way she had looked at him across 1,000 childhood suppers when he had reasoned poorly or wept at the wrong thing. "So," she said, taking in the seal on the table, the bound Beta, the weeping bride, the gray-eyed woman, standing straight-backed by the wall. "The old ghost finally has a face. I did wonder if she had lived." She turned to Emmerich, as though the others were furniture. "You are angry. I understand it. But you are a king, and a king must be able to hear a hard thing said plainly. So I will say it plainly to you now, as I have said every hard thing to you. Your whole life, the valley made you. Its silver built the wall that keeps the eastern packs from your throat. Its grain fed the army that won you your father's war. I did what the crown could not afford to leave undone, and I did it while you were too young and too soft to be asked to choose, so that the choice would never stain you." She did not so much as glance at Sorrel. A few hundred wolves in a valley, weighed against the whole of the Caldmere. "I would make the same choice tonight. Any regent worth the office would. I gave you a wall and an army and a throne that does not wobble," she went on, "and you give me this face, as though I had done something grubby. Sentiment is a tax the strong pay to feel clean, Emmerich, and I have never been able to afford it, and neither, if you are honest, have you." "You knew," Emmerich said. His voice was very quiet. That was the only warning any of them ever got, that quiet. "You knew she was my mate. Before the fires were ever lit, you knew what the old bloodline said, and you knew what a true Luna at my side would mean for your regency, and that is why it could not wait, and that is why it had to be fire, and that is why you have hunted her across 6 years of roads. Not for the silver. The silver was only the story you told the others. You burned my mate out of the world before I could ever love her, so that you would never have to share me with anyone who might tell me the truth about you." For the first time in his life, Emmerich watched Lady Mordaunt fail to find an answer. And in her silence he heard the whole of his childhood turn to ash in his hands, and he understood that the woman who had taught him what honor was had never once possessed a scrap of it herself. "Take her," the king said. They had gathered the whole of the pack for a wedding. Emmerich let them gather. The great court of the Caldmere had not held so many wolves under one roof in a generation. Nobles and warriors, pack elders and village speakers, all of them come in their finest to see their king take Coruscant of the Windholt to mate and seal the alliance the court had promised them. The banners hung, the moon symbols gleamed, and upon the high dais where the bride should have stood, there stood, instead, a gray-eyed woman in a plain gray dress, because Sorrel had refused every silk they offered her. "I will not borrow a lie to tell a truth," she had said. "Let them see exactly what their crown tried so hard to erase." Emmerich stood before his people, and he did not soften a word of it. He laid the whole of it out in the cold light of the great hall: the forged intelligence, the burning of the High Valley, the murder of a loyal pack for its silver, the 6 years of hunting its survivors, the assassins sent under his own mark to a roadhouse in the rain. He named Corisande, who did not lift her head. He named Lady Mordaunt, and a sound went through the hall that no regent ever wishes to hear. And he raised up the little silver seal for all of them to see, and told them whose it was, and what it meant, and that the last true-blooded Luna of the Sylvain had spent 6 years pouring their wine and clearing their tables, while the truth waited in her collar for a court honest enough to hear it. A wedding crowd is a strange and volatile thing. It arrives wanting to love someone, dressed in its best, primed to cheer, and there is nothing more dangerous to a liar than a crowd that came ready to adore and discovers, mid-breath, that it has been made a fool of. Emmerich knew this. He had counted on it. He did not raise his voice once in the whole telling, and the quieter he grew, the further forward the great hall leaned. Then he had Varric brought out in chains. The beta had recovered some of his arrogance in his cell, the way such men do. He looked out at the sea of faces, and found them turning against him, and he did what cornered, proud things always do. He reached for scorn. "This is madness," he said. "You would throw down your own beta, your own bride, your own regent, on the word of a tavern girl who knows a knife trick." He laughed, and it echoed badly in the silence. "She is nothing. She is a serving girl, with delusions and a nameless whelp. Look at her. One good blow would put her down where she belongs." And Sorrel stepped forward to the edge of the dais and looked down at him, and the whole hall went still, because her face had done the thing it had done in the roadhouse on the first night. It had gone calm. "You dared me once," she said. Her voice carried into every corner of the silent hall. "In a roadhouse, in the rain, in front of your laughing men, you put your feet up on another man's chair, and you dared the serving girl to strike you. 'One punch,' you said. Put everything behind it, and if it moves me, you told me you would kneel down and beg my pardon in front of all these good men." She descended the dais steps slowly, and no one moved to stop her, least of all, the king. "I did not take it. Then I had a child hidden in that kitchen, and a life to protect, and I had learned a long time ago exactly what it costs a woman like me to strike a man like you." She stopped before him. "But we are no longer in that roadhouse, and I am no longer that serving girl. I am the Luna of the Sylvain, and I am the mate of your king, and there is nowhere left in this world I need to hide." She lifted her chin. "Here is your dare, returned to you. 1 punch, I dare you." Varric, chained, sneering, certain to the last that the world was still the shape he had always bullied it into being, spat at her feet and opened his mouth to call her something vile. He never got the word out. She put everything behind it, exactly as he had asked. 6 years of running behind it. Her mother, in the burning doorway, behind it. Every survivor she had carried down the mountain, and every night she had not slept, and every false name she had worn behind it. The blow took the arrogant beta of the Caldmere clean off his feet and dropped him senseless on the stones of the great hall, and the crack of it rang up into the rafters, and for one long astonished moment nobody in that vast crowd made a sound at all. Then the hall erupted. It was not the cheer of a crowd enjoying a spectacle. It was something deeper and far more dangerous to the wicked. The sound of a whole pack understanding at once that it had been lied to for years, and choosing in a breath the side of the woman it had watched pour its wine. Elders came down from their benches to kneel toward the seal. Warriors who had ridden the northern campaign put their fists over their hearts and bowed their heads in a grief that had waited 6 years for permission. And Varek, who had built his whole life on being the strongest man in every room he entered, was carried out of the greatest room in the kingdom, unconscious, laid low at last by the single punch of the very serving girl he had dared to throw it. Somewhere in the crowd, a woman began to weep, and then another, and the weeping was not for the fallen Beta. It was the sound of a pack, grieving aloud, at long last and all together. For a valley it had been told for 6 years, it was right to forget. Halvard, old Halvard, who had first spoken her mother's name into a roadhouse full of killers, went down slowly onto one knee on the cold stone. And one by one, the warriors of the northern campaign went down with him until half the great hall knelt toward the last Luna of the Sylvain. Winning did not give her back a single thing she had lost. That was the truth Emmerich had to learn in the weeks that followed, and it was a harder truth than any confession. He had thought, in some unspoken corner of himself, that justice would close the wound, that the seal restored and the guilty thrown down and the Sylvain name spoken again, with honor in the great hall, would somehow balance the account. It did not. It could not. There is no ledger in the world on which a burned valley and a murdered mother and 6 stolen years can be entered against a punch thrown and a regent deposed and be made to come out even. The High Valley, when they rode up through the pass at last, was still ash. He had ordered no procession, no guard, and no banners. It seemed to him a thing that should be done quietly, the way you enter a room where someone has died. They left the horses at the mouth of the pass and walked the last of it on foot, and the higher they climbed, the more silent Sorrel became, until she was not speaking at all, only walking into the place that had made her and unmade her in a single night. 6 winters had softened it. Green had come back over the black in places, the way green always does, indifferent and merciful. But the great hall was a broken tooth of stone against the sky, and the orchards were charcoal, and the wind that came down off the peaks moved through the empty places and made a sound that was almost, but not quite, a word. Sorrel walked through it with Bram's hand in hers and did not weep, and her not weeping was worse than any weeping Emmerich had ever seen. She stopped at last in a doorway that had once led into the hall, and she stood there a long time, and Emmerich understood that she was standing exactly where her mother had stood with a spear. "I used to hate you so simply," she said without turning around. "It was the one clean thing I had in all the running and the hiding and the lying. I had that one bright hatred, and it never asked anything of me but to keep burning." She turned then, and her face was wet at last, and she let him see it. "And now you kneel in my mother's doorway, with her seal returned, and her name restored, and her murderers in chains. My good clean hatred, you have left me nothing to feel but the size of what I lost. I do not know how to forgive you. I do not think I can. You rode at the head of those riders, however, they lied to you. You were the sword." "I know it," Emmerich said. He did not defend himself. He had stopped defending himself the night the wall came down. "I will not ask you to forgive me. I have no right to your forgiveness, and I will not insult your mother by begging for it." He knelt in the ash of the Sylvain Hall, the king of the Caldmere, in front of the woman his house had wronged past all mending. "I ask only to spend whatever is left of my life, earning the right to stand in this doorway beside you. Not as your king, not even as your mate, if the word is poison to you. As the man who will rebuild every stone of this hall, with his own hands if you will let him, and who will carry your survivors down no more mountains, because they will never again have anything to run from." Sorrel looked at him for a long time in the ruin of everything she had loved. "I cannot promise you forgiveness," she said at last. "I did not ask for it. No." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, a plain and tired and human gesture. But she did not tell him to rise, and she did not walk away. And after a while she came and stood in the doorway beside him, and looked out with him over the broken valley. And that, for now, was not nothing. That was a beginning. The valley did not come back in a season. Grief does not keep to seasons, and neither does the mending of it, but it came back. The survivors came first, in ones and twos, and then in whole, frightened families, down out of the far packs, and up out of the villages where they had hidden under names that were not theirs, drawn by a rumor almost too large to believe, that the Luna lived, that the seal was safe, that a king had knelt in the ash and sworn the Sylvain home. Sorrel met every one of them at the mouth of the pass herself. She knew most of their faces. She had carried a good many of them down this same road as children, years before, and now she stood and watched them walk back up it as grown wolves, and the sound they made when they saw the valley again was not quite grief, and not quite joy, but the thing that lives in the narrow country between. They rebuilt the halls, stone by stone, and the king kept his word, and worked among them with his sleeves rolled and his hands torn, and slowly, slowly, the pack that had learned to fear his banner learned instead to hand him a cup at the end of a long day and call him by his name. It was Bram, in the end, who said the thing that turned the key. He found the king one evening at the edge of the new orchard, watching the sun go down behind the peaks, and he climbed up onto the wall beside him without being asked, the way he had not once done in all the frightened months before, and he swung his legs and was quiet for a while. "Mama does not have the bad dreams every night anymore," he said at last. "Only sometimes." Now, he considered this. She used to hold her arm in her sleep, the arm the man cut, like it still hurt. She does not do that so much now either. He looked up at the king with his mother's gray eyes. "I think that is because of you. I do not think she knows it yet, but I watch, and I know things before people know I know them." He nodded, satisfied with his own testimony. "So I decided you can stay. In case nobody told you, I am the one who decides, because I am the one she carried down the mountain, and I am telling you that you can stay." Emmerich had faced armies without his voice failing him. It failed him. "Now, thank you," he managed. "That is the greatest honor anyone has ever done me." And behind them, in the doorway of the rebuilt hall, with the last like gold on the seal at her throat, Sorrel stood and watched her son knight her enemy into her family, and she did not correct him, and she did not call Bram inside. And for the first time in 6 long years, the woman who had kept a whole vanished pack alive inside her own 2 hands allowed herself, quietly, in the falling dark, to hope. It was not forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness, if it ever came, would come the way the green had come over the black, slowly, on its own indifferent schedule, in its own good time. But it was a door left open. And after everything, a door left open was its own kind of miracle. Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. I truly hope the journey of Emmerich, Sorrel, and little Bram found a place in your heart, the way it found a place in mine. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so the next tale finds you the moment it arrives. And before you go, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from tonight. Leave your country, your city, or just your little corner of the map down in the comments below. I read every single one, and it never stops amazing me how far our story family truly reaches. Until the next time, be gentle with yourselves, hold your people close, and may the moon light every road that leads you home.